Presently, we're doing a series on the necessary attitudes for recovery. So what does a person need to have as an attitude if they're going to recover? And that is a whole bunch of ones, and tonight we're coming to one of the most probably trickiest ones to explain, and it's called acceptance. So if you've been around recovery for a while, you're familiar with the serenity prayer, but it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that word, to accept the things I cannot change. So what that prayer says to me is a couple things. And it goes, number one, when you come into recovery, acceptance is a difficult thing to figure out. What should I accept? What shouldn't I accept? It gets very complicated. Does that mean I should just accept everything? Is there some things I still refuse to accept? How do I figure all of that out? And so that prayer is saying, help me know the difference between what to accept and what to change. And that becomes a huge issue. What I don't know if you've ever thought through is, why is it that that is such a big issue for people in recovery? Why is it that so many can't figure out what they should accept and what they should not accept? So I want to take you back into the world of complex trauma and help you think of acceptance from that perspective, and I hope that it will begin to make sense to you. So think of a person in a healthy relationship. You are in a situation where you're being abused or you're being mistreated or disrespected. And so what you do is you set a boundary. You say, I'm not going to put up with that. I won't accept that kind of behavior. And so you make that clear. And if it's in a healthy relationship, people respect that. And so they will stop being abusive, or they'll stop saying disrespectful things. So your boundary puts it back into where it should be, as healthy. But what happens if it's a child growing up in an unhealthy environment, and they're being abused, and they are being disrespected, and they try to stop it? They set a boundary and say, I'm not going to accept that. Well, nobody pays attention to their boundary because they're so little. And so then they go to their next tool that they have in their toolkit, which is fight or flight. I'm out of here, but a kid's too small to fight or flight. And so they're being disrespected, they're being abused, they're being neglected, all kinds of hurtful things. Nothing is being done to fix it. They can't run away, they can't fight back, so they freeze. And what I want you to understand is, to that child, freezing means I have no other option except to put up with this. And putting up with it, being forced to put up with it, feels like acceptance. And so what begins to happen in the child's mind is, accepting stuff means I accept not having my needs met. It means accepting not or being hurt. It means accept being all kinds of bad stuff happening to me. And they go, that something doesn't feel right there, but I don't have an option. And so as they go through that, they're struggling internally because all of this acceptance stuff now doesn't seem healthy or good. And so a lot of people coming out of complex trauma now come to their adult life and they go, I'm not going to accept anything that makes me uncomfortable. So no longer is it I won't accept that which hurts me and is wrong. They now say all acceptance is bad. So I won't accept anything that I don't like. So I will rebel against everything that I don't like. So now there's actually some good rebellion because they're not going to put up with some abuse. But now they run as soon as they feel uncomfortable. Now they run as soon as they're in a difficult situation because I might get hurt. And so their lack of acceptance now gets taken to the extreme, and they don't accept anything they don't like. So now when you come into recovery, it's you need to learn to accept, which is true, but you go, does that mean I go back to being that little kid again and I just accept everything, even bad stuff? And so the prayer is saying, help me figure out what to accept and what not to accept. Because I've been wired in a way where I was forced to accept bad stuff and I rebelled and didn't accept anything. Now I got to find a healthy normal in the middle. And that is a super big challenge in recovery. And so what happens for so many people is they still lean in the direction of, I'm out of here. I always need an escape hatch. I always have to be manipulating and controlling things so that I never am in an uncomfortable situation. So if you've been around me at all, you've heard me say, you're going to have to sit in it. And some people think what I'm saying is you sit in everything, even if it's bad. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's some things that you have to accept that you can't fix right now, and it's wrong to run away from it, and it's not going to kill you, so hang in there and sit in it. But there's other things that you go, no, I won't sit in this. I need to fix this and deal with it. But how do I know the difference between the two? So that's what I want to talk about tonight. So think of it this way. Let's say you're a woman and you're pregnant. So you know that delivery date is coming, and that is going to be a world of pain. Part of you says, I can accept that pain. I will accept it because a good thing will come out of it. It's a natural process. If you are still that person that says, I won't accept anything, you're going to have trouble when it comes to delivering that baby, because you just don't want to go into any pain at all. And so it's understanding what kind of painful, difficult situations do I need to accept and which do I need to reject. So let me start with this. Never accept abuse. Never accept people trying to set unhealthy boundaries with you. So if you are in an abusive relationship, don't sit there and say, I should learn to accept this. Get out of that. Do not accept that. People will treat you like you treat yourself. So if you don't respect yourself, they won't respect you. If you're constantly beating yourself up and think you deserve that, they will help you by beating you up. So a lot of this is you grow internally so that you can learn what to accept from others and how they treat you and what not to accept. So that's what I want to begin with. Don't accept abuse. Don't accept unhealthy boundaries in relationships. But now I want to go to the unpleasant parts of recovery that you need to accept. So this is going to be a lengthy list because there's a lot about recovery that's not fun. And there's a lot in recovery that's going to make you want to run or quit that you have to learn to accept, okay? So let's begin with yourself. Accept who you are in your basic personality, your basic physical body form. Part of complex trauma is you hated parts of yourself. You hated that you were shy. You hated that you were so sensitive. All of those things. You now need to accept the things that you can't change about your basic personality. And that is really where it starts, is self-acceptance. Second thing, and this is a tricky one, so I got to explain it in two parts. You're screwed up. You're messed up. You're broken. Accept that, but don't accept it at the same time. Okay, so let me explain that. A lot of people come into recovery and they begin to learn about complex trauma, and they begin to learn about how all their coping strategies are unhealthy, their relationship patterns are unhealthy, the way they deal with stuff is unhealthy. And they go, I am so screwed up. I hate this. I'm mad about this. I wish I wasn't this way. And they just get angry. And they hope it'll automatically fix itself. And what I say is, yes, you're screwed up, but I still love you. Don't be judging yourself. Don't get angry. Accept that that's where you're at. You can't heal and grow until you accept where you're at. And you accept, wow, I'm a mess, own it, then you begin to grow. Now that takes us to the next part, which you accept it, but you don't accept it. So think of it in terms of a child learning to walk. So right now they crawl, they don't walk. So you accept that they crawl and don't walk. But does that mean you accept that they'll not walk for the rest of their life? No, you accept, but you don't accept that they don't walk, and you do it this way. I accept because they're 6 months old that they don't walk, that's the right time for them. They don't walk, but when they're 2, they better be walking. So you realize there's a process based on their age and development. So the same is true in recovery. I accept that I'm messed up and this is where I'm at. I don't cope well. I don't trust people. I have authority issues. I have manipulation issues. I have control issues. Okay, I accept that. Now, that doesn't mean you go to everybody and say, accept me. I'm going to be this way for the rest of my life. No, you go, I accept that I'm screwed up, but I don't want to stay here. I want to change. And so that becomes what this is about. A lot of recovery is accepting where I'm at in the journey, but being unwilling to stay there forever. But that's where I'm at right now. And so that is part of the trickiness of this acceptance thing. But then it goes further. Do you know what a lot of people think? Okay, I'm screwed up, but by next week I should be perfect. And you go, okay, you're accepting that you're screwed up. You're accepting that it's a process, but that process is slow, and that process is messy. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a real neat and tidy little process that only takes a week or a month. This is going to be years of doing well, failing a bit, doing well, failing a bit. It's slow, it's messy, it's gradual. Now, a lot of people get frustrated with that because they're a perfectionist and they want to be fixed now. And so what they have to understand in recovery is I have to accept that this is a slow journey, not a fast one. And if I don't accept that, then I'm always going to be angry and frustrated, and that's not going to help me in this journey. So face the facts and accept them. Again, I don't know if you've had little children and you've tried to teach them how to eat by themselves with a spoon. They got food all over the table, all over their face, hair, down the front of them. It's a disaster show. Now, you don't go to your little child who's trying to feed themselves for the first time and say, bad kid, you're making a mess, smarten up. You go, that's cute. You're learning. And I don't expect you'll continue to eat like this 2 years from now, at least I hope you don't. But you're going to start with this being a very messy process. And so early recovery, believe it or not, it's like a nursery. There's a lot of poopy diapers around. There's a lot of smells and little messes. That's part of the beginning of the journey. Okay, next thing. Recovery is hard work. You can get angry about that, but as soon as you accept that, it sure helps you in the journey. So what I want you to understand is every part of recovery, you're going to have something in you that gets frustrated that it's not going as smoothly or easily or as quickly as you would like. But if you just give in to that frustration and you start looking for a fast, slick cure, 5 years from now, you're still going to be looking for that cure and you're still going to be just as messed up. So the sooner you accept that this is hard work, it's slow, it's gradual, I'm willing to do it, the better. And that is where many people fail. Next, it would be really easy to do recovery if every fiber of your being wanted to do recovery. The reality of recovery is part of you wants to do it, part of you doesn't. You got this dark side that still wants to get high, that still wants to go and sleep with every woman you see. You got all of these forces pulling you in the wrong direction. And so you have to live with this internal fight, this internal conflict. That's part of recovery. Now, you can get down on yourself and think you're a terrible person, but believe it or not, everybody goes through that. And the sooner I accept that I'm this divided person that gets pulled in two directions, and the answer is not to be mad about it, but to learn how to give into the good side and not the bad side, the better I am. Next one. All of us would love to grow in an ideal environment where everybody loved us, understood us, encouraged us, helped us, was there for us. We'd love everybody be in recovery to be perfect, except us, of course. We're allowed to be slow and mess things up, but we want everybody else to treat us perfectly all the time. Doesn't happen. So you go into recovery and you're asked to recover with screwy people who got attitudes, who got issues, who hurt you, who aren't there for you, who break promises, and you go, I don't like this environment. Put me in a treatment center where everybody's perfect. Put me in a 12-step group where everybody's perfect. Doesn't exist. You got to do recovery in less than ideal circumstances. And so that is tough. And a lot of people get very distracted by that. And they spend a lot of time taking everybody else's inventory and why they're more screwed up than them. And they get their focus totally off of their own stuff. And that is a common thing. Okay. Another big, difficult part of recovery is you begin to realize I'm now living with the consequences of a lot of bad decisions while I was using. So now I got debts coming out of my ears. I got creditors knocking on my door. I got CFS refusing to give my kids back. I got children who don't trust me. That's all because of past decisions, but now I'm living with the consequences. And you can get angry about that. You're probably going to cry about that, which is okay. But the reality of recovery is I got to deal with a lot of crap that I did and the consequences of that crap. And so if I just get angry that I don't have any money, that my kids don't trust me, that's not going to help. I just have to say, you know what? This is my lot in life right now because of decisions from the past. Accept it, deal with it, and it will get better if I deal with it. It's no use just getting angry about it. Next, recovery involves dealing with stuff you'd rather not deal with. So you realize I've stuffed all kinds of pain and wounds from years ago that I've never dealt with. I got all kinds of losses from my past that I've never dealt with. I got all kinds of trauma and abuse from my past that I've never dealt with. And that's what keeps me relapsing. So if I'm going to get healthy, I can't just learn a bit of fun information. I got to deal with some painful stuff. And I don't want to do that. So part of what you're doing here is saying, none of this stuff in recovery I want to do. Because it's not fun. And so I need to accept that it's part of the journey. It won't last forever. As I deal with each thing, I have one less thing to deal with. And pretty soon I get stronger and better, but I got to get through that. And so I need to accept that recovery is dealing with stuff that I'd rather not deal with. And then recovery often makes life more difficult than if you weren't recovered for a while. Life usually gets harder before it gets easier in recovery. I tell clients all the time, every time you learn a new tool, your life will probably get harder before it gets better. Because it's awkward using a new tool. Other people don't like that you're using a different tool because now you're different and the rules of the relationship have changed and the dynamics have changed and they give you opposition and flack and it gets harder. And so recovery usually gets harder before it gets better. And then part of that is also you have to start adding things to your life and getting a structure and routine and discipline and responsibility, and all of that is a more difficult life until you do it well over a period of time, and then it becomes natural. Next thing, early recovery, you can't take a holiday. You can't just say, I'm going to chill and I'm just going to float and coast for a while. I'm not going to work hard. No, you got to be vigilant all the time. Because there's so much vulnerable stuff in you, you can get triggered and relapse within a couple hours. There are so many triggers that you have that can send you quickly downhill, that you have to be on guard. And a lot of people get tired of that because they just want to take a vacation from recovery for a while. In early recovery, that's really not an option. And so you have to accept this is going to be a 24/7 experience for a while, whether I like it or not. Next, if you're not depressed yet, I'm working on getting you there. So next time you pray the Serenity Prayer, it might have a brand new meaning for you. But the next thing that happens in recovery is you realize, because of my addiction, I now have limitations I didn't have before. I can't go to certain places that I used to go. I can't hang around people I used to hang around. I can't be or do certain things because it'll get me in trouble. It'll lead me back to a relapse. And then you begin to realize, I've got all kinds of things that can mess me up in a hurry. I got anger issues. I got shame issues. I got unhealthy relationships. I got conflict issues. I got all kinds of fears inside of me. I don't do well with stress. I don't do well with boredom. I don't do well with loneliness. Disrespect can send me flying. Wow, I got a lot of stuff. And so you realize, wow, I am a walking time bomb. If I get the right trigger at the wrong time, I'm in big trouble. And so that is early recovery. Limitations, living with such a great number of vulnerable areas. So again, what you would do if you were in battle as a soldier, you would say, I'm going to walk through a minefield, but I got a map here. So instead of getting mad that I got asked to walk through a minefield, let's study the map. Let's figure it out. Let's do this thing and quit complaining about it, because it's not going to do me any good to be mad about it. And so you have a map, you can begin to do what you need to do and just accept that that's part of the journey. Then the next one, as you begin to deal with emotions, as you begin to deal with all the stuff from the past, you're going to find that you go through grieving over and over. You're going to grieve a lifestyle. You're going to grieve old friends. You're going to grieve family possibly. You're going to grieve maybe that your kids don't trust you. You're going to have losses that you've never looked at that start coming back in flashbacks. And over again, you grieve and grieve. That's part of getting healthy. Okay, just a few more in case you're getting really discouraged. Next thing you have to accept is life now has some unpredictability. So you could be all pumped up that you're going to go out with your girlfriends or boyfriends for a night, and then all of a sudden, that morning, you feel so weak and vulnerable. You know that if you go out with them, you might not make it through the evening and you have to cancel. And it's just like out of the blue, you get hit with either a craving or this obsession, or you feel so vulnerable and it gets a life of its own, and you can't seem to stop it right away just by trying to change your thoughts to something else. And you go, I don't like this. I don't like getting blindsided by these weird things that have a lot of power. And so what can happen is you can be having a great day, and then in 1 minute it goes to a very bad day. And that is an element of unpredictability. Now that will get better and better as you get healthier, but that is a reality of early recovery. And then the last one, understand or accept that people won't accept you. People won't understand what you're going through. Do you know that most of the people in the world don't understand addiction and trauma? And so they're going to go up to you and say, well, you've been going to treatment for a month now, aren't you fixed yet? That's how they think. Or isn't there a pill somewhere that will just get you over this? And that will frustrate you and get you really angry, because now they're judging you that you're still in treatment after a month when they think you should be fixed. And that is something you have to live with. And then you're going to get people that come up to you and say, oh, you still go to meetings? You know what? I just read about this new solution. You should check that out. And then they're trying to push stuff on you that they're pretty sure will fix you. Or they might come up to you and say, you know, you keep talking about yourself as being an addict. I think you're just using that as an excuse. And they're going to judge you. And that'll just make you furious. But they're out there. And you can't avoid them. And many are within your own family. And so the sooner you accept it, the better. So that is the best I could do for the things you have to accept in recovery. That's not fun. Okay? But what I want you to understand is this. You take any of those ones that I listed, and that's almost 20 things. If you don't accept them as part of recovery and you get angry, guess what? You get stuck at that part of recovery. You don't grow beyond that because you're not willing to do what is necessary because you don't like it. And so what you don't accept in recovery that's difficult is where you get stuck. And many of you can relate to that. And so some people even get stuck on, I don't want to accept that maybe there's a spiritual component. Or I don't want to accept that maybe I'm going to need people in my life. I want to do this alone. Or I don't accept that I need to change my schedule to have meetings regularly. If they don't accept it, that's where they stop and they get stuck. So I hope that you're able to say, okay, I don't like it, but I accept it. And that's what the Serenity Prayer is all about. So last week we talked about the fact that out of 100 people that start a new diet or exercise program, after a couple months, only 5 are still doing it. And that's not a very good stick-at-it rate. And then we went to the Bible, and I raised the question, is complex trauma in the Bible? And though the words are never used, the concept is big in the fact that Israel as a nation had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And it was a cruel, abusive slavery, people killed, etc. So once they come out of slavery with complex trauma, they then spend 40 years in a wilderness heading to this place God had promised them, which was going to be a land of prosperity and great beauty, etc. In that 40-year stretch, you see complex trauma in spades. It's just everywhere. And what we looked at last week was, well, I'll read it to you. After 11 months, so they got out of slavery day one. They're so excited, so grateful to God. We're never going back there. So glad this part of our life is gone. And 11 months later, they say, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us die by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. So they jumped the worst case scenario. Everybody's going to die. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt, to slavery? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So the thing they hated, the thing they couldn't wait to get out of, the thing they vowed they'd never go back to, now 11 months later, they're thinking and planning to go back. And it is such a beautiful picture of what happens in recovery. You get clean and you go, I'm so glad to be done. I hate my bottom. That was the worst thing. I'm never going to go back there. 11 months later, you're wanting to go back. So what I didn't cover last week is what I want to cover tonight, is just to help you to think a bit further with me. What caused them to want to go back? Why, after 11 months, did all of a sudden they say, let's go back? Or another way to say it, why is that a lot of people start thinking about a relapse? And they start thinking that the old life is better than the new life. So let me just give them to you. So number one, what we said last week is God took them out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of them. And what I meant by that is they had learned a mindset, they had learned a culture in Egypt, they had learned in slavery how to cope with things, they had learned attitudes that had been implemented and reinforced in them for years, ways of thinking, all of that, they took it with them. So in recovery, we always talk about the geographical cure, which is people say, I'm going to move to a new city and then I'll do better. And the real problem is you take yourself. And that's the problem. It's not the location, it's what's inside. And so because of the slavery, the people of Israel had all this emotional baggage. Ways of thinking, ways of coping, ways of dealing with stuff, all of that they took with them. And so then, all of a sudden, this new life, which started out feeling great, but they took themselves and now they still got to live with themselves and they don't like that. And guess what their brain goes? Instead of saying, maybe I should change, they say, I need another geographical change. Let's go back to Egypt. And that is what happens. But what I want you to see, it's not location that's the issue. It's the baggage inside. So it's not getting out of Egypt, it's getting Egypt out of you. That is the challenge. And that they weren't willing to look at. Next. I don't think they realized how scary freedom is. So you can imagine sitting in slavery and how awful it is, but then getting freedom and thinking this is going to be wonderful, but it's scary. And because what happens now? You're in a situation where there's a lot of unknowns. You've never lived this way before. And so slavery, even though it was terrible, at least you knew what to expect. At least you were familiar with it. It was your normal. This freedom is not your normal. And you don't know what to expect. And so you're afraid you're going to have something happen that might hurt you or mess you up. So just the very fact of being in freedom means being in the unknown. And that's a scary thing. But then think of it a little bit further. They've been slaves for years. They've learned how to relate to authority a certain way. They've been hard, they've been tough, they've been angry. And now they get out of that and they go, okay, now you should be a normal person. Well, what's that? That's scary even to think about. What do I do with that? And if I start changing, will that make me not as good? Will that make me get hurt? That's scary to think of changing who I am. And then you go, well, I used to have my best friend called a drug that helped me cope. Now I'm getting rid of my best friend. How am I going to cope with all of these problems? That's scary. Because now I got to deal with them sober. And I don't want to do that. And so that becomes a scary thing in freedom. And then I come into freedom and realize a whole bunch of my relationships aren't very good. And I got to change relationships. If I'm going to get healthier, I got to get healthier people around me and healthier relationships. And that's scary. So take that a little bit further. As you go and look at every time Israel complained during that 40 years, which was lots, almost a daily thing, but the times that are recorded for us to read, they complained every time they felt fear. And so when they felt fear, what was the fear about? Maybe God won't meet our needs. I haven't seen any wells around here for a day. Maybe we're going to go thirsty. Even though God's provided water for 37 years, I still get worried I don't see water. Maybe I'm going to go thirsty. And guess what they did once they got fear about their needs not met? Then they got angry and negative. God's mean. Moses is a jerk. This is awful. We should have died. This is a disaster. We're all going to die anyways. You've been there. But it all started with fear. That was about, can I trust God to meet my needs in these situations? And so that is what the heart of the fear, the scary part of freedom is. Yes, I got to walk into situations, but I have to learn to trust as well. And if I don't learn to trust people and my higher power, I will be struggling with fear, which means I'm going to get negative and angry and go to worst case scenario, and all of that stuff is going to happen. And I will lash out at everybody that gets close to me. So that's the second one. Third one, they didn't know who they were apart from the problem. So if you have been your entire life a slave, every morning you got up, you were told what to do, you carried heavy stones all day, let's say, and you did that every day. You went home, you ate, you fell asleep exhausted. You got up and you did that. That was your identity. You were a stone bearer or stone carrier. Now, who are you? In order to be that, you had to be tough. In order to be that, you had to shut down a whole bunch of emotions. Now you go, if I take away all of that surface persona that I created to survive as a slave, who am I? Am I a little weakling? Am I a little sensitive person that might cry all the time? I don't have a clue who I am. Would anybody want me now? And so the fear becomes, I don't know who I am, and if I find out who I am, will anybody want me or like me or respect me? And that's not a pleasant place to be. And I think I've told you before of a guy that came into my office one day who had been an enforcer for one of the gangs, a muscular, powerful guy that was one of the most intimidating persons that I've ever met. And if I saw them angry, I think I'd be running, because they were a big machine, muscles. He came in my office crying one day and he says, if I take away all my muscles and all my hardness and all my anger, who am I? And I don't know if I like who that person might be. I'm kind of afraid to find out. And that was a real crisis for that person, because he said, when I was angry and tough, people respected me. But if I take that away, will anybody respect me? When I was angry and tough, girls wanted a bad boy like me. I was desirable. But if I take that away, will anybody want me? And so that's part of coming out of slavery, is you get your old identity, all the personas, the roles gone, and you go, now who am I? Will anybody want me? And it's scary, and it's easier to say, maybe I'll just go back to the way I used to be, because then I know what I can get. Okay, next one. Freedom never quite feels as good as you thought it would. So when you're in slavery, guess what you create? A fantasy life of what freedom would be like, where you didn't have a slave master driving you every day and giving you the whip on occasions. And guess what that fantasy would be like? Sitting on a beach in the Bahamas, sipping on your mate, all of those things, and you go, no responsibilities, just be nice, served by other people, and then you get into freedom, and you go, what kind of deal is this? I got to get up and go to work every day. This wasn't what I thought. And so what you realize is, while you're in addiction, you create a fantasy of what recovery will be like, but that fantasy often isn't accurate. It's often got a lot of distortions in it. And so you get into recovery, freedom from the addiction, and all of a sudden it's not quite as good as you thought it was going to be. And guess what addicts are great at doing? When something's not quite as good as I thought it would be, I'll focus on negative. And I'll get mad about it. And I'll say, this is for the birds, I don't want this, this sucks. Let's go back to Egypt. Next one. You got to think of this terms. Freedom means responsibility. So picture if you got a teenage child, they sit in their room some nights and they mutter about how mean their parents are. Because they made you do your chores today, and they made you get up and go to school, and they made you go to bed, and you go, I can't wait to get out of this house and be free of these maniac parents and all their dumb rules. And they get free. And a year later they go, can I move back home? I don't like doing my own laundry. I don't like cooking. And they go, freedom means responsibility. So guess what happens in slavery? There's a lot of freedom, or there's a lot of stuff you just do every day that you want to get out of. And then you get out of it and you go, now I got to be a responsible adult. About 30 years ago, when I was first kind of introduced to a lot of this information around addiction and trauma, it was around the black culture coming out of slavery. And the thing is much like we would have with our indigenous cultures coming out of residential schools. What they realized is that 90% of the men in prison in the United States were black men. And most were addicts and most were involved in gangs. And what they realized is if you went into a black community, all the children were being raised by mums and grandmoms. The dads were absent. And the dads coming out of slavery said, I'm tired of serving people. I want to do whatever I want to do. That meant I want to be irresponsible. So I'll bring kids into the world, but I'm not going to take care of them. I like having the sex and the woman, but I don't want the responsibility. And that was the problem. So they were still thinking like slaves. And that is what happens in recovery. People come into recovery and they still want to be irresponsible as they were in the problem. Why pay bills? I'd rather spend my money on crack. And I don't want to go to a job. I'll go if I feel like it, but otherwise I'm not going to go. And now you get into recovery and I got to grow up. I got to accept responsibility, and you realize I don't like responsibility. I'd rather go back to Egypt. And so recovery is hard. Next, there's a part of complex trauma that I've talked about many times, and that is you can have everything going well in your life, but if one thing's going bad, you fixate on it, and before long, in your mind, your whole life sucks. You could have 98% of your life is fantastic, but that one thing messes you up. And what happened with Israel is they kept focusing and fixating and obsessing on every negative thing. And they just got more and more negative in their thinking. And so part of recovery is changing that tendency in your brain. So you realize your default setting is always to gravitate towards focusing on negative and obsessing on negative and blowing it up. And you go, I got to stop that. Because if I continue to do that, pretty soon I'm going to hate this new life, even though it might be wonderful, and I'm going to say the old life was better. And that happens out of that negative focus. And then the last one is this. I don't know if you remember from last week, but their words were this: let's go back to Egypt where there were onions and garlic. And what those were the spices of food that gave it flavor. And you want to know what they're saying about their new life? It's too normal. It's too boring. We need to spice it up and give it some flavor. And so let's create some chaos. Let's go back to Egypt and get back to the high of all of the spice. And the reality of recovery is as you get healthy and develop a normal life, it will feel kind of flat and flavorless at times. And that will create in you a desire for the old life and the high of the old life. But I want you to think about that, because this is, to me, such a key point that I want to end with it. I think that many people growing up in complex trauma have shoved their emotions down, and when you stuff your emotions, your life becomes empty, boring. There's nothing there. You're dead inside. And so your only way to feel alive is excitement, adrenaline rush. And so what you begin to think in your mind is happiness comes from excitement. You don't have anything alive on the inside to give you happiness, so it has to come from the outside through excitement. So you create as much excitement as possible and even create drama if it's necessary. What you don't realize is the reality is that excitement does not equal happiness. Excitement equals some pleasure, but it then quickly passes. Second thing is that true happiness doesn't come from the external, it comes from the internal. And so what happens if people don't face that and realize that is they come into recovery, and one of their biggest triggers is boredom. And as soon as they feel boredom, their brain goes, I need excitement. So in their mind, I'm bored, I'm unhappy. What's the solution to being unhappy? Excitement. So let's create excitement. I've had this talk with many people, and it goes like this. What does give you that deep inner happiness? Is it external excitement? Well, if that's all you experience, that's all you have to kind of gauge it by. But think of this. I've talked to many people after, for the very first time in their life, they've had a heart-to-heart talk with somebody where they felt safe, accepted, not judged, loved. Do you want to know what happens when they come away from that? They feel joy. I felt a connection that was deep. I felt a love and acceptance, and it just felt so wonderful. Now, what usually happens next is, I bet you it's not real. I bet you it's going to pass. Oh, now I feel uncomfortable. I wonder what they're thinking about me. And you go back to the negative worst case scenario. But for a minute, you realize something, that true healthy intimacy is what becomes the core of true joy. Let me take you back thinking about a child. I don't know if you ever wondered, why did God make it so that children need to nurse from their mom? God could have made it so that children could drink out of a cup the first day they're born. Or they could drink from a cow, who knows? But why did he breastfeed? Because a bonding happens, and God's design was in a healthy situation, and complex trauma messes this all up, but in a healthy situation, the child is getting imprinted by the mom. They learn from the mom about emotions and how to express them. They learn by looking at the mom and sensing the mom, whether they're loved, accepted, and whether their world is safe and stable. And if they feel loved and accepted, they can relax. And then as they get older, they can share every part of their life. And they can stay connected. And as they do that, peer pressure doesn't bother them, because they're connected at home in a real deep connection, the only place they truly feel loved. And that grows, and eventually, when they go looking for a person to spend their life with, they're not just looking for hot, they're looking for somebody I can connect with at the deepest level. Because that's what will provide a foundation of joy in my own life, in their life, and my children's life. So God designed as the fundamental building block of happiness and life, deep, healthy connection. The reality, the sad part, complex trauma destroys that. Complex trauma, you don't feel that connection, you don't feel part of, and you feel all alone. And so if you've never experienced an intimate connection, you don't really understand what I'm talking about. But what I want you to think about is this. God designed you to need it. God designed you that become the base from out of which all happiness and good stuff would flow. So work at developing that. That's what I don't think Israel had. They did not have that because of slavery. They didn't trust. They had to be hard. And they were afraid to risk creating that connection. But if they had, they wouldn't have been worrying about the garlic and onion back in Egypt, because they would have found something that gave even greater joy because of a change and healing deep within. That, for many people, starts with God. And then it grows and it starts to happen with a couple people, and that begins to bring about a change that is beautiful to watch.